Hello, everybody. So thank you for joining us. I can see a few people are coming into the webinar, so thank you very much. Hope everyone's well this afternoon. We will start properly in a minute or two. We'll just wait for others to join us, and it's great to see so many of you coming into the webinar. Fantastic. So we'll just give it another few seconds. Brilliant. Okay, so we're 1 minute in, so let's assume that most people have managed to get on okay, and we will get into today's webinar. And good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. So welcome to the first webinar of 2023 in our ongoing exciting series of events for charities and non-profit organisations. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about what good strategic planning looks like, and particularly in what is undoubtedly a very turbulent and challenging environment at the moment. We've all got cost of living challenges to face. We've got the wider economic climate, rising energy costs, and an ongoing, increasingly competitive fundraising environment. Just to introduce myself, for those who've not met me, my name is Katy Baker and I'm Director of Special Projects at Oaks Consultancy. At Oaks, we work across a range of socially minded sectors, supporting organisations with things such as fundraising itself, income generation planning, and as you may have guessed, strategic planning. And I'm joined today by a fantastic and incredibly talented and experienced panel of charity leaders and specialists who I hope over the next hour or so are going to share some of their wisdom and insight and thoughts on strategic planning for charities, particularly in uncertain times. I am going to ask them to introduce themselves rather than me try and do it in a moment. But before we do that, I'd just like to welcome everybody who's joined us this afternoon. We really encourage you to engage in the session, and you can do that through submitting your reflections, your questions, your thoughts in the Q&A box, and we will try and pick up and field as many of those as we can as we go through. Without any delay, I'd really like to introduce our panel. I'm going to hand over to them individually in a second. Unfortunately, and I'm going to come to Tina first, Tina's having some challenges with her camera. We're hoping at some point it might start working, but for the moment, Tina is audio only.
I'm so sorry. So sorry.
Okay. It's always the way, isn't it?
I know.
Live events. But Tina, could you introduce yourself properly? Tell us a little bit about your role, background, and particularly, your experience in terms of strategic planning in charities.
Thank you, Katy. And again, I'm so sorry. Apologies about the video. It's very hard when you're looking at a blank screen. But good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tina Costello, and I'm the Chief Exec of the Heart of England Community Foundation. We are a place-based funder, which means all the money that we raise is redistributed into the West Midlands and Warwickshire. I've been at the foundation for 17 years, not always in this role. I had a 10-year career managing awards for all at the National Lottery Communities Fund, and I originally came to the foundation as the grants manager. So my passion and background really is in making grants. So since taking on the Chief Exec role, I am responsible with the board for setting our 3-year financial and operational strategies. I have lots of experience in that, which I hope we'll tease out through the conversations today.
Thank you very much, Tina, and I do hope we get to see your lovely face at some point during the session as well.
Thank you.
Aaron, can I come to you next? And I think we've just got to front up the fact that, Aaron, you are one of my colleagues at Oaks Consultancy, so you're joining us with kind of 2 hats on today, so talking about your experience working for Oaks, which you'll talk about in a moment, and also as a trustee of a small charity. So over to you, Aaron.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, I've very much got a dual focus coming to the conversation today. So firstly, I am a trustee of Edgbaston Foundation. So we are a charity based in Birmingham, the official charity of Warwickshire County Cricket Club, very much using stadium and a club status in communities in Edgbaston and city centre of Birmingham to engage different communities in sport and bring to them all the benefits that that can provide in terms of social inclusion, in terms of physical and mental well-being, and community cohesion. And in the second part, I'm head of trusts and foundations here at Oaks, so supporting organisations across the country and internationally in their fundraising. But relevant to today's conversation, my time at Oaks, I've been involved in a number of projects where we supported organisations in terms of developing their own strategies. So from across different sectors, including charity and health sector as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And last but certainly no means least, Vivien, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you? Here we go. It's worth the wait.
Hello.
Hello, hi everybody. I'm Vivien Waterfield and I'm Deputy Chief Executive at Home Start UK, which is a UK-wide family support charity, where I'm a member of the senior leadership team, of course, and but also head up the External Relations Directorate. So that's fundraising, marketing, comms, policy work. And for those of you that don't know Home Start, we're a federated charity. So I work for the central body, Home Start UK, and we have 182 Home Starts right across the UK, some in the Midlands here, but in all four corners of the UK as well. And and they range in size from very small local charities to some quite large operations. So, which is always interesting when you're doing things like strategy development, because of course they're all quite. There's some very common themes to the work that we do, but they're all different shapes and sizes and work in very different kinds of communities. And we've just been through the process of developing what we call a new strategic framework for the organisation, and that's because it's a shared framework for both us here at Home Start UK and every local Home Start, which was no mean feat to get that in place. But it's an interesting kind of approach, really, when you need to work with such a large number of internal as well as external stakeholders to get that in place. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we go on through the next hour.
Thank you very much, Vivien. And I think what's interesting in terms of commonality between the three of you is that you're all engaging or working or supporting directly with other organisations outside of your own. So I think that's an interesting dual perspective in terms of your own strategic planning, the challenges we're facing and how it impacts you, but also others that are within your kind of environment. So perhaps I could come to you. Well, back to you, Vivien, just to kind of ask, I guess, what the impact has been for Home Start in terms of the kind of central organisation and actually those federated organisations you support with, in relation to the current cost of living crisis and, the really challenging environment organisations are facing at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult out there at the moment. I mean, we're seeing, as lots of people will recognise, a real perfect storm, I think, of big increases in need and in demand from families, in our case, our beneficiary group, real concerns about them and the pressures that they're under, but alongside that, pressures on resources to support them, our volunteers and our funding, and real difficulties and pressures for our colleagues, of course, around the network. So our local Home Start managers say it's affecting them from every angle. Funding's being squeezed, costs are rising, and it's affecting their work as well. So it's a lot, I think, for small local charities in particular to deal with. And when you're a manager and all you're really thinking about every day is the finances and worrying about money, and you're having to turn families away, there's a lot to deal with, and we're very aware of the impact therefore on our own colleagues' health and well-being as well. So I'm sure lots of you will recognise some of those pressures, and we're not, even though we're quite a large operation, we're not immune from them by any means, and they're concerning us every day. And the immediate challenges of how you deal with that kind of the urgency of some of those issues alongside the longer term strategic work is one of the things that we're juggling all the time.
Yeah, thank you for that, Vivien. And I guess, Tina, there's some parallels there, in terms of Heart of England Community Foundation as an organisation, but that you're engaging probably with a lot of smaller groups and organisations in the wider West Midlands. So how is it for you?
Yeah, so it's easier for me to actually talk now that the camera's on. So yeah, as you say, we are a registered charity, but we're also a funder. So we don't directly deliver any services that other charities will do. We support around 760 organisations a year. I think we do regular surveys, and obviously the surveys are coming back, and 75% of the organisations we support, smaller charities, are worried about the rising cost of living. For me, I don't think we've even started with the impact yet. Energy started, all of the bills are starting to increase. So for us, what's been really interesting is a slight dip in our application rate. And I don't think it's about need, because it's definitely about need. So that's something we're exploring. Are our grants still fit for purpose? Do we need to look at making maybe slightly larger grants, but to less organisation? And that's always going to be a challenge for us, because our mission is to be a small grants funder, but we also have to make sure that we're fit for purpose for the sector now. So generally at the moment, for us as a charity, we survive by charging for the services that we provide for donors. We have had some donors that have had to reduce their giving this year. I don't know whether that will continue. The other part of what a community foundation does is grows investments. So in 100 years' time, the Heart of England is still here supporting communities, and you will all understand they've taken quite a significant hit, but we're hoping in time that this will come back. The reason this is important is because we distribute the interest on our investments. So next year, it's obviously looking at, unfortunately, delivering less than what we normally would.
So those kind of global seismic, kind of financial implications, really could have that knock-on effect for your work and the future work of the foundation.
Yeah, I think we're very fortunate as a charity in that we've always been hosted by a major corporate in Coventry. And all of these things just help with your general running costs. It saves us 51,000 a year in all of our bills and utilities through being hosted, so it's helpful.
That's really helpful, yeah. So to you, Aaron, what's the lay of the land in terms of Edgbaston Foundation, your role as a trustee? How are you experiencing, or how is this manifesting for you and for them?
Yeah, it's probably slightly differently to Vivien in terms of the nature of our work means that we have to understand and respect our place in terms of the programs we provide. In the face of the current context, there are a lot more services that are in demand to meet those needs. We understand the incredible value that our programs can bring, but ultimately where things have to be sacrificed, that the nature of sport development programs is going to be further down the pecking order in the face of all that. And for us, as being a small charity, so we're below £250,000 in £250,000 income, the way we manage our programs and our organization's finances is we are cautious and careful not to reach beyond the means that we have, and very much make sure that if we want to deliver a piece of work or a program or project, that we actually have the resources to do that. And that can be really hard to stick to that in the face of these times, where you go, actually, we're seeing these increasing needs and challenges amongst our beneficiaries in our communities. Shall we do something additional or different or extra? And that can be really hard to say no to that, but it's twofold. It's about, you won't be able to support people, communities, if you're not a charity in 2 years' time. So it's about being mindful of that, but also understanding that there are other services and organisations that are better placed to, this is their bread and butter in terms of being able to support these communities, and actually understanding, here's the limit of what we are best placed to provide, and actually let's turn our attention to, at some of our program sessions, we're just making sure that the people we work with are aware of these services rather than trying to deliver extra support ourselves a little bit. We've absolutely seen an increase in challenging needs for it. For instance, we do an annual toy drive at Christmas, and the one that we just did at 2022, the demand from partners across the city in terms of, families, households who were going to have less this Christmas and stuff was so much more higher than it was when we did it in 2021. So we understand, the greater increase in need it is, but it's also very important that we understand and respect what we are best placed to deliver and support with.
Yeah, great, thank you. So given all of these factors and the pressures that your organisations and those that you work with are facing, how do you go about thinking about developing your strategy? you know, it feels like, you know, perhaps some of these challenges are, you know, incredibly overwhelming. You know, they take up all your headspace, your kind of day-to-day activities, but, you know, it's still potentially really important to have that strategic plan in place. How do you go about approaching it, prioritizing it? Tina, can I come to you first?
Yeah, and actually I am also a trustee of a small West Midlands based charity, so I do see the impact of trying to do financial planning and strategy. So for us, although we're not a charity that delivers services, we do work with financial donors who want to give and make a local impact. So our challenges are similar to any other. I need to retain donors. And unfortunately, with the landscape, we're finding some of the businesses we work with may be looking to actually support their own internal staff teams, you know, in terms of cost of living, in terms of supporting them. So it's a little bit uncertain for us. We have a 3-year strategy, and alongside that, a 3-year financial pipeline. Our strategy is coming to an end this year, so we're now looking at developing our new one. For me, whether you're a large charity or a small charity, I just think it's important to have a clear direction of where you want to be in 3 years. And I think for smaller charities, for me, when I speak to groups, the challenge is often capacity. I've just been out today and met a small charity. They're absolutely brilliant at delivering. They've just said, Tina, our rent's due to be renewed in May. And I said, are you thinking about that now? And it's like, we should have thought about it a year ago. So I think the challenges are off to capacity and resource. If you're directly delivering something, when do you get the headspace and time to sit there and talk about strategy? For me, and I think we're going to talk this further down the line, I do think it's where it's very important that you have an engaging board, particularly if you're a smaller organisation, a board with a skill set that can support, lead and advise. We'll talk about the role of a trustee later, but they should be there and be part of the strategy from the beginning to support.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're quite right. We'll definitely talk a little bit more about board involvement and governance, because I think that's really important for this topic. So Vivien, Home Start UK, you've got a brand new strategic framework. You must have been developing that, you know, post-COVID, you know, whilst lots of these kind of current challenges were developing. You know, how did you tackle, you know, thinking through your strategic intent and your direction when you knew that all these kind of factors that could just completely change how you might deliver your strategy, you know, were developing as you're going through? So what's been your approach?
Yeah, well, we launched it early last year, but we did a lot of the legwork and the heavy lifting on the strategy during the pandemic. So there was certainly a lot of uncertainty around at that time. One thing we didn't do was to rush it. You know, the operational challenges were there, and we had to focus on them as well. So we couldn't take our eye off the ball on that, but we did know we needed a longer term approach as we came out of the pandemic. And I think so we had to kind of manage the two things in tandem, which wasn't easy, but I think was important for us, so that we came out feeling in a good place. I don't think any strategic plan or framework predicts the future anyway. I think change is going to happen whether you have a strategy or not. The key question is how much you're happy to kind of drift along, adapting as you go along, and how much you want to prepare for change, set the general direction, and have a longer term vision, so that you're kind of responding to and aligned with that ever-changing environment. I think it's important, and we started by kind of just reviewing our vision and our mission. We did test it early on, but once we had that and had that kind of real core in place and agreement around what we saw as an organisation, the things that made us different and the things that created real value and impact for our families, then we were able to start focusing on you know, what the strategies and what the tactics were to help us get to deliver on that, really. I think my suggestion would be to not focus on what you don't know, but to focus when things are changing fast on what you do know. Because even when there's a lot of things changing, it's surprising how much you do know. And, you know, so for example, pretty early on, in the pandemic, we could see that the rate of digital adoption was really accelerating, and that was going to be a factor for us to consider, both during and coming out of the pandemic. So we could see that volunteering was changing, that there was a tremendous response to the in local communities from people wanting to volunteer their time, but they were wanting to do that in a different way. Maybe not make the long-term commitment, the regular commitment that they had in the past, but be on hand to respond when needed. And so some of those things, we were able to kind of take on board and consider quite early on, and having a kind of strategic process to help us, discuss and to kind of test out some of that thinking was really helpful. So think about what you do know. And what is known, rather than worrying too much about what you really can't predict, because no strategy predicts the future.
Yeah, I know. I think that's a great point, Vivien. And I think what we have learned from the last few years is that you definitely can't predict the future, but that for many organisations, it's really tested their resilience and how adaptable they are and can be. So yeah, thank you for that. Kind of taking almost a slight step back, but we're here talking about strategic planning, but is it ever okay not to have a strategy? There are organisations who perhaps ridden COVID, come through it, and now between strategies and are struggling to find that time to refresh or review or set a new strategy, or even very young, newer organisations who don't have that strategy yet. Aaron, can we come to you? In terms of what's your view on that? Is it okay not to have one?
Yeah, and I'll have to temper my response here as an employee of an organisation that supports organisations to develop their strategies. Yeah, I'd say of course it's okay. There will be circumstantial times where it's just not high priority. Both Tina and Vivien touched upon this in terms of instances where it just isn't the priority because you're too busy doing the delivery or whatever happened. At Edgeworth Foundation, we actually are going through a new strategy development process later this year, and we've been operating without a fully fledged strategy of what you classify as one for the past 12 months, just while we've kind of got some things in order. There's some short-term challenges that need to be addressed coming out of the pandemic, etc. So there will absolutely be times where it's okay not to have a strategy, and of course if you look into the charity sector, you will find instances of fantastic work done by charities that weren't the product of strategy. And that's just the brilliant ability of charities. What I will say is that, and the reason probably we're all on the panel today is we're obviously huge advocates for quality strategy, and the benefits of having one just far outweigh not having one. And it's no surprise that if you look into, what are commonly the most renowned, most effective, most supported charities in the country, you'll find they all have a very clear, compelling strategy, and that's not a coincidence. So absolutely, there are times where, short-term incidents, circumstances mean that it's better to operate, or you're just not possible to give yourself the time to, probably commit to developing a strategy or having a strategy. But it is absolutely much better in the long run for the organisation. Definitely there are ways that you can work without one, which I'll touched upon as well, but maybe it's coming on.
Tina, what about you? What do you think about kind of?
Yeah, I agree with both, Evan. I've put in my notes, yes, we've got a strategy. It doesn't mean we deliver everything on it, but what it does give, it gives you a focus and a direction. And another bullet point, but it doesn't actually have to be war and peace. It's about proportionality, how big your charity is. We would expect a charity like ours and Homestock to have a strategic plan, because ultimately, we're supporting other organisations. But I think for me, I'm just put a note here. I've sat on a lot of grant panels in the past, and you always get this, oh, well, how are they going to sustain themselves in the future? But you know what? There will be charities and organisations that won't. They will be reliant on grant funding. So for me, the most important thing is looking at where you're getting your funding from, which would be part of your strategy. I do have groups ring up, our grant runs out next week, have you got any funds? And you think, it takes time.
Yeah,
it takes time, to apply. And so for me, it's good practice. I do think it's good practice, but I do agree it's not the be all and end all, particularly for newer, very small charities. But where you're getting your finances from, important.
Brilliant. And I see you've taken delivery of a cup of tea as well, Tina. So
sorry, I know.
That's great strategic planning.
No, I mean, you know,
Oh, no sugar, please.
It was just for show.
Amazing. Vivien, your thoughts on this? So, you know, do any of your smaller, you know, your federated organisations, you know, they adopt your framework, but I guess they may have their own approaches or strategies as well. You know, what's the view on not having one?
Well, we deliberately developed what we call a strategic framework rather than a single strategy, because to do that for 182, well, 183, including Home Start UK organisations, didn't feel right, because every one of our local Home Starts works with different kinds of communities. Their funding mix is different. They serve different types of, families. They, you know, they'll have different pressures locally in different environments and contexts in which they operate. So we wanted to create an alignment, and I think that's the thing that a strategy does. It creates a sense of alignment both in and across an organisation, so that, you know, you can have the conversations about where do we think we're going in terms of volunteering and our volunteering model. And okay, the volunteering team may have always been thinking about that, but, you know, your comms team, your fundraising team and your IT team might also need to be engaged in this conversation if you're going to make some shifts in order to kind of move forward. So, you know, firstly, you get that sense of alignment both in an organisation, but in terms of federation, you get it across a federation. So I talk about Home Start and federations as being a bit like a flock of starlings, in that, you know, each is on its individual journey, if you like, but collectively moving in the same direction and supporting one another in that journey, and learning from and sharing resource and knowledge across the kind of across the agglomeration, if you like. So for us, it was really key. We wanted local Home Starts to have flexibility to prioritise and to interpret and deliver what they think were the most important things locally from that strategic framework. But equally, we wanted to create that sense of one movement and an aligned, you know, a sense of purpose and direction. And we're starting to see that now. So, you know, the local Home Starts, some of them have focused, we've got 4 different strategic commitments, one around growth, one around impact, one around voice, and I do know the other one, but my colleague in corporate will tell me that in a moment, and one around inclusion. So locally, you know, a Home Start down the road here in Leicester may decide they want to extend and grow the service. That's the priority. There's an opportunity. They've got some funding. They think they can sustain that. You know, up in the north of Scotland, another Home Start might say, you know, there's a whole community close to us that we're not serving at all, and we think to be a really inclusive charity, we need to be reaching out to them and really making sure our service is reaching that group of families. And I think that gives us the opportunity to kind of make those choices locally that are right for each individual Home Start.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. I wanted to move on to kind of stakeholders. So, you know, a big part of any, you know, organisation strategic planning process is engaging the right people to get, you know, feedback, input into that strategic vision. I wanted, you know, given that we're in such an challenging fundraising environment, I wanted to kind of pick on funders as part of that process. And actually, I'm going to come to Vivien and Aaron from a charity perspective, and then Tina as a funder. So I'm going to kind of ask you to think about it in that sense. Okay. So, you know, should you, that's question number one, should you engage funders in strategic planning in your, you know, thinking about your vision? And then, you know, sub question is, how do you go about doing that? What's the kind of best practice to engage funders? And Aaron, are you obviously are all across, you know, the kind of funding landscape and funders and, you know, even from kind of Edgbaston's perspective, what's your view on engaging funders in planning?
Yeah, I think it will obviously depend on the level of importance or contribution of that funder to your organisation. I certainly have no reason to be against engaging funders in the process. You know, they're one of many voices or audiences for your organisation. So why shouldn't you be open to including them in the process if you're going to include other types of stakeholders? Tina may disagree with this, but some funders won't even expect or want to be involved in the process at all. I think that's probably fair in terms of their own time commitments, but also because I think there'll be many that respect that they're not best placed to determine what your strategy should be, and actually leaving you as an organisation in that position of respect to say, actually, you guys are the experts in this, and we're just not just, but we're supporting you. I think a couple of potentially notable examples where you would want to include a funder would be either where they're a major contributor to your organisation, so more than a quarter of your income, for instance, might come from a single source or a funder, and certainly that passes what a threshold of importance to your organisation would be, and certainly to continue having a good relationship with them, they might get a sense of real inclusion and connection to your organisation to be involved in the process. So I think that can be really helpful. I also think if you have a connection to like a thought leadership type of funder in your organisation, so for example, someone like the Education Endowment Foundation or the Youth Endowment Fund, just organisations that are very much at the forefront of best practice and insight into a certain issue or subject, can provide real value to your process. So if you're tackling an issue, then it might be worth consulting them about what are the emerging trends in that issue, or what is best practice in terms of approaches that are effective or ineffective in tackling that issue, and so making sure that your discussions around strategy are being informed by really informed people. So yeah, I'd absolutely say there are instances where it's relevant and you should really be open to it if you have those opportunities. But most of the time, or a lot of the time, funders may not want to or even be able to or expect to be involved in that process.
Thank you, Aaron. Vivien, what's your thoughts on this?
I mean, my thoughts were, if funders are willing and do have the time to engage, I think it's brilliant. I tend to think of some of our longer term relationships with funders, particularly some of the larger trusts and foundations, as see them very much as partners really in our work in many ways. And they've got a lot of it. Actually, they've got, for us, they had a lot of information and insight on our work because they fund our network. And so that they've got a perspective that perhaps can add real value to our thinking, and we found it really, really useful to have their input. And quite interestingly, they tended to push us to go a bit further and to be even bolder and a bit more ambitious than perhaps we might have been. So they were from our funders who said they really like to see us using our reach with families, because we support about 36,000 families a year. That's a lot of families that we're working with, many in their own homes and certainly in the community. So they were pushing us to say, how do you use the insight, the knowledge, the relationships that you have with families to actually share what you're seeing with funders. And certainly one of our medium to longer term kind of commitments is to build that work and that influencing work and voice as a result of that. And so that would be an example where we we were thinking that would be something we should look at, and they were really pushing us to say, it's worth, it's really worth you doing that. We'd love to see you do that. And of course, what you then get, ideally, is them going on that journey with you and starting to invest and help you develop that work as well in the longer term. So if you can get those funders on board, and and certainly in our case, like I say, large institutional organisational funders in particular really appreciated being kind of consulted and involved. And actually, some of our individual donors, I know we had a small focus group with them as well, but at a time when we're needing to diversify income and to actually broaden mix of funders and supporters, important to get the perspective of individual donors on, some of our kind of what we're doing, how we're communicating, and our ambitions and plans for the future. So if you've got the time and if you've got the opportunity, I would definitely do it. In terms of how you do it, I don't think there's one particular way. I had individual conversations, we did a little focus group, we did some survey work, we did a number of kind of ways of communicating with funders, whatever suited them really, made it easy and convenient for them to get involved.
Thank you, Vivien. I think, really interesting. What I wonder though, you know, it sounds like those conversations you've had with funders that you view as partners, and I think that that's, you know, really, you know, kind of really valuable way to view them. But what if their aspirations didn't align with yours? How do you manage that where there is that bit of conflict? Perhaps they want something for you that aligns with their strategic intent, which perhaps isn't as aligned with where you want to go. So how do you balance it when you don't agree or they don't support your strategic vision?
I think if that's the case, then it's better to know that, isn't it? And certainly it's an interesting conversation to have. And probably an opportunity to kind of explain a bit where you're at and your thinking, and perhaps that might, you know, it might actually be really helpful if they're thinking that you should be going in a direction that you don't think is right for you. I would still see that as an opportunity to have a really useful conversation with that funder. So I don't think you have to take, I mean, you don't have to take all the feedback and ideas that any of the stakeholders give you. It's important that you test your own thinking, and it helps you avoid that kind of thing that you can get in an organisation sometimes, when you're kind of all, you know, it's great all to be in agreement, isn't it? But sometimes that's a bit too comfortable, and it's good to get a little bit of challenge.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll come on to kind of wider stakeholder consultation in a moment, because I think that's a really, really good point. So Tina, as a funder, how often are you asked to perhaps be involved in some of your grantees' strategic planning processes? Does that ever happen? You know, are you up for you know, giving that input and insight?
Touching what Aaron said, I can't say that generally we're approached by the organisations we support. They may ring for advice.
Yeah.
So it might not be, or let's talk about our strategy, but it could be. So I would like to think we do have an open door, and I would like to think that we are a phone call to support organisations with anything, including strategies. So although we don't have funders, if we're talking the lottery, children in need, etc., but our donors are our funders, because if I don't have any donors, I don't have any core income, and we don't survive. So for me, we'll twist it around. So the donors are our funders, but our customers are our community. Our customers, if we aren't delivering grant programs that the communities want, there's absolutely no point. We've just literally done, so the way that we would work with stakeholders, we've just done a survey to the sector, and the biggest thing, 75% are worried about the future of payment of utility bills. And what's come out is organisations want multi-year grants. So when we do our strategy this year, our ambition will be to make grants that are maybe not just 12 months. And how we do that, I haven't quite worked out, but I do, and we do listen to the voice of the sector, because that's what we're here for. If it wasn't for those wonderful groups we fund, we wouldn't be here. In terms of donors, so for me, in a charity like ours, I think it's important that we have evidence. So we've just had our grant making externally evaluated our last 3 years, but we didn't include the pandemic, because to be honest, I think it would make us not better than we possibly are, because we were just churning money out the door. So take that year out. It did come out, lots of good stuff come out, but what's come out is gaps in geography of our region, gaps in community of interest. My role now is to engage with our donors, who some of them are quite fixed in what they want to fund, but it might not be what's best for society needs right here and now. So a lot of my role is advocating for the sector and trying to show the evidence to donors that actually maybe you could put your money, I don't know, to young people in sport or to a particular area of Birmingham. So that's the way we engage with our stakeholders. But for me, it's our donors and the communities that we serve.
Yeah, and that link between, no, that makes a lot of sense, Tina. And picking up on that kind of wider, so we've touched upon funders, and Tina, you've introduced that topic really nicely in terms of the wider complex stakeholder network that an organisation might have, and how important they are to any, well, it's certainly, what I would feel a good strategic planning process. Aaron, kind of how you know, what thoughts have you got in terms of how you approach a complex network of stakeholders and how you engage them in a strategic planning project?
Yeah, I always think the process is exactly like we, as a staff team, say we, I'm not part of the staff team, but a staff team at Edgewater Foundation go about engaging communities to learn about our programs. And it's almost just thinking about it really simply. So first of all, just mapping out who it is that you want to speak to, who are those stakeholders that you're going to speak to. And then you can go from there and figure out the best ways to speak to those stakeholders. So are there any particular stakeholders that you think will be best spoken to individually, or actually do you want to speak to stakeholders as part of some sort of group meeting, session, whatever it is, and you think there'll be some real value in terms of different organizations bouncing off each other, and you know, almost organizing, you know, putting some holes in the diary, so to speak, and just offering them out to your network of stakeholders. I think a lot of stakeholders will probably feel really privileged to be asked to be part of that process, and so there shouldn't be any fear around extending that invite. You know, if they can attend, if they can't attend, it's by the by. But actually, you know, being able to provide their perspectives, that's a nice position to be in. But absolutely, you'll have some stakeholders that you think actually it's probably best if we speak to them on a one-to-one basis. But going back to Vivien's point around actually perhaps getting some feedback that you're less keen to hear, I think when you go out to external stakeholders, you at the same time you don't want it to be open ranged for them to comment on what your organisation does and the value of that. So really prepare in advance kind of what questions specifically you want to ask, or you know what you want their feedback on, rather than leaving it too open as a conversation, because then you can have some really spend a lot of time on conversations that aren't going to feed back into what that final strategy looks like, essentially. So yeah, certainly preparing subjects, questions that you're going to talk about with different stakeholders, the best way you're going to speak to them. Hopefully you get a bit of a mix of different stakeholders as well. So beneficiaries of your organisation, delivery partners, referral partners, and you know, making sure you're not just confining yourself to one type of stakeholder. And again, just to reiterate what Vivien said earlier, don't be afraid to get negative feedback. Criticism is often how we improve as organisations, and yes, sometimes you'll be able to filter that out as justified or unjustified. But ultimately, if you expect to improve and grow as an organisation, and you might need to hear some things that go, okay, well, we didn't deliver that the best way, we didn't manage that relationship the best way, or actually these organisations or communities have never even heard of our organisation. So that's something we need to be aware of. We just assumed that we had a great profile, and I know that's something that we've, as a foundation, you've got this internationally recognised stadium in the middle of communities, and you just assume that it's easy to assume, that everyone's going to know and feel like they know your venue and your organisation. But actually, to find out where that isn't the case is the best way to then start achieving a strategic point around engaging more people from your local communities. So you've got to be really open to criticism or more constructive feedback, rather than hoping it is just some sort of echo chamber.
Yeah, no, I agree. So kind of broad in terms of who you're consulting with, but keeping it quite focused in terms of what you're consulting on, rather than keeping it really open. No, I think that's great. So Vivien, you must have a really complex network, in terms of the the network of organisations you support, as well as everybody else, beneficiaries, working with those organisations, your funders. So how have you gone about it? It's on a huge scale as well. That must have been quite a challenge.
Yeah, it was a big piece of work, and I think internally, in terms of our network, we set up a kind of steering group, so that we've got membership from the network on that steering group to offer real support and scrutiny to the process, because it's really important for a federation to have a really kind of a really good process that felt transparent and felt had real integrity, and that we were seeing it from the perspective of local home starts, although it somebody has to lead it. So the national body is the one that does that, but we led it with the network, and I think that was really, really helpful. And we had regular meetings, and it keeps you on track as well. It's talk about the day-to-day pressures of running a charity. It's very easy to say that you'll do something in a month's time, and actually before you know it, a month's gone past and your timelines have slipped, and you've got, I think any process like this, you have to have momentum, you have to keep that momentum up, and you have to have an end point, otherwise it just drifts on forever really, and you end up almost having to repeat it because it's already, you know, you've already kind of some of the things that you started out thinking have already shifted. So it kept us on track in terms of timeline, and we worked with a third party as well to help with some kind of impartial support on that, and they did a lot of the kind of data analysis and synthesis of some of the feedback, and they prepared that for us so that when it came to the meetings we've got them in front of us. I know not everybody can afford that, but you know, to have a kind of third party agency, we work with an organisation called Lucent Consulting who are brilliant, but you know, if you can't afford that, you know, to have somebody who's got some experience and can be impartial, but to really help drive and support the process, I think is really, really helpful, whether that's a trustee or somebody, you know, who can get through some skill sharing on the kind of route. I think that is helpful. Inevitably the day job takes over. And yeah, I think other than that, the other thing I would say about the external stakeholder mapping and the kind of input that we got is it really helped us to, so because we had a pretty good idea of what our strengths were and what makes Homestart different and why it's valued and what, but actually to hear that from stakeholders is really, really helpful, because a lot of what you do in your strategic work is to decide on what you want to build. You know, you do obviously shifts and changes you want to make, but it's also an awful lot you want to keep, and it's really important that you keep, otherwise you'll see yourself drifting, you know, in all sorts of directions. So our families and volunteers and actually many of our funders, we got a lot of consistent kind of feedback about what it is that made the charity different and valued, and that was really helpful as well. It wasn't new information to us, but it did help kind of reinforce a lot of our thinking.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Vivien. And yeah, you know, that impartiality bit is incredibly important. And if you are fortunate enough to be able to afford, you know, that additional support can really help manage that process. So we've got a question from someone in the audience, actually, before we move on to perhaps the kind of board involvement. So Oliver has asked, in his role, he's tasked with facilitating a workshop with my senior management team to review the first year of a 3-year strategy. Do you have any advice or ideas for activities that could help us learn and get insights on how to get on track in year 2? Anyone like to have a go at that? So it's that midway point, isn't it, in a strategy? You know, how do you review it? How do you make sure that you're, you know, kind of you're on track? And if you're not on track, how do you get back on track?
So I've literally just sent our board papers for next week, and we are in year 3.
Okay.
And our year starts next month in April. So we have a template. So underneath strategic aim, we have the objectives that we would hope to meet. Then we have some boxes. I think what's really important is making sure you've got a document that is monitoring and tracking the progress on what you want to achieve. And touching on what Vivien said, if I could see, oh, we delivered the strategy in every objective. No, we didn't. Yeah. Because you have curveballs like pandemics and things like that.
Yeah,
which changes. But what it doesn't change is our strategic aims. They will stay the same. It's what sits underneath. So for me, it's having a really good, easy to understand template. Oh, we've had traffic light systems. We just type in a box, this is the progress. And then if we haven't achieved it by the date, just put a small bit of dialogue and why you haven't, and then push the date back. So for us, it's about how we report and having the documentation to do that.
So yeah, you know, that makes sense. So the report, but you know, the reflection on why perhaps as well. So that's probably the most important bit.
Definitely the reflection on why, because I defy anyone who achieves everything every year, because you're right, things change, life changes, but that's the way we would do it. And if we've decided actually this objective doesn't really meet our needs next year, we can change it. Because it becomes our operational plan.
Yeah, so it's viewing your strategy as a live, evolving document, not necessarily a kind of fixed thing.
And the other thing I would say is making sure you've got buy-in and input for the wider team, because ultimately they're delivering this.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I'm really conscious of time, because I would love to touch upon the kind of the team element, but then, you know, the board element, and we might not have time to do both. So given we referred to it earlier, and I'm going to ask this question as a trustee of an organisation who's currently just starting a strategic planning process. How do you get the best out of your board when you are going through this strategic planning process as a charity? Vivien, you've just been through it, so I'm going to start with you.
Well, I think that relation, I mean, we say it, don't we, always, that relationship between the chief exec and the chair is absolutely key. I think that's very important to have, you know, have the conversations early on about a process and what, you know, what's the right level of board involvement, try and get the balance right there. But the last thing you'd want to do is turn up to a board meeting in 6 months' time with your lovely kind of strategy on a page or whatever you've got in your document, and they kind of go, this is all news to us. We haven't had an opportunity to play. And so, you know, I'm sure that wouldn't happen. But equally, you don't need the board and don't want really the board members in every meeting. It's not necessary. They should delegate a lot of the heavy lifting on this to the senior leadership team. But it's important to keep them up to date, to know when the check-ins are. We had, as well as our chair, we had 2 board members who volunteered to be on the kind of steering group that I talked about earlier. And so, you know, they were really trusted to kind of keep an eye on things and to be the bridge between the board and the senior leadership team. And they, you know, they were available more often when we needed them. We had regular meetings with them as well. And they had experience with strategic planning in their own organisations, which was helpful. So they brought some ideas to us on that. So yeah, just trying to identify what you know, the chair needs to be kind of part of the. Needs to be engaged, but equally there might be another board member or two who've got some expertise and experience to offer, and I'd encourage people to involve them early on.
Yeah, fantastic. Aaron, what's your kind of view? You know, as a trustee, you know, how do you want the team to get the best out of you? You know, how would you view your kind of input into strategic planning?
Yeah, so some of the things I'll say in response to this will cross over with exactly what Vivien said. I think the key thing is to over communicate, not under communicate. Better to absolutely keep them in the loop too much and then almost be asked to, okay, that's enough, rather than the other way. Assuming you've appointed people to your board whose input you really value and they're bringing in skills and experience, then why wouldn't you make the most of it? So absolutely giving them opportunities to contribute. But it goes back to that point, same as earlier, in terms of under stakeholders. If you've got people that you might be too involved or to dominate this conversation, then actually giving them really clear, questions or things that they can contribute to, rather than dictating, contribute to everything. So again, that's just a bit of upwards management, saying, I appreciate your input on X, Y, Z, rather than leaving so open that actually it's going to take you off course a little bit. As a trustee member, I much prefer to be open communicated with and be involved in this strategy. So like Vivien said, I don't get to a meeting in 6 months' time and be like, well, why I haven't had any visibility of this, or no, this is the direction we're going in a little bit. So absolutely that's not what you want to do. But understanding that your board will be volunteers and trying to find time for this, hopefully alongside day-to-day work, day-to-day life. So if you are going to ask for their input, being respectful of that and giving them ample time, to contribute. If you're asking for survey responses or conscious of meetings, giving them ample time and notice of when their input is going to be required. And then similarly, if you've got concerns that you've got people who are going to be quiet, or it's like putting teeth trying to get feedback out of them, and giving people strict deadlines that they have to give their input by as well. So making sure that they have had that opportunity. So probably just a bit of proactive upwards management in terms of giving them ample time, but at the same time deadlines and specific metrics for what they are contributing to.
Yeah, some great, really practical advice there, Aaron. Thank you. Tina, could I ask you a slightly different question, just because I'm really conscious we've only got 5 minutes left, and I think many people might want to hear about how you engage your team in strategic planning, and kind of how have you approached that in the past? How do you intend to approach it? Because you will be having a new strategy soon, I assume.
The first thing I'll say is I've made mistakes and learned from them, such as presenting a draft strategy to the team. Oh, maybe I should. And you learn and you do. I'll be honest, I was really inexperienced when I took up this role, but I've certainly learned. So the first thing we do is have a team day. We go out of the office, we have a day with an external facilitator. We look about what we'd like to achieve over the next 3 years, but I've got the team buy-in from the very outset, because ultimately they're delivering this along with us. Then senior management team draft a strategy, and then we have a board day with a facilitator. What we don't do is go to the board with a blank piece of paper. It's not a good idea. I'm smiling. I'm trying. There is some challenges between.
Are your trustees watching today, Tina Bonus?
I don't know whether they're probably one of them is. I do think that us as executive team, we know how to run the organisation. We know what's needed, but I do need my board for the strategic direction. I've got some really good people, so we present it and we talk about. We may change a few things, but for me, I've got buy-in from the board and I've got buy-in from the team. And then we report quarterly to our management committee on progress against the operational plan. Right. So that's how we buy in with the team. And then their objectives and their appraisals are set through what we put in the strategy.
Yes, Vivien, is that your hand up?
Oh no, no, I think Tina answered that really well.
I know. Oh, it's my. I think it's doing my end. Brilliant. Well, actually, Vivien, I want to talk to you just for one kind of final question to you about staying true to your strategy, particularly with everything that's going on. So you've launched your strategy, you're starting to deliver it. How do you stay true to it? You know, if things are changing so quickly, what are the kind of key ways that you make sure that you don't drift too far away from whatever it was that you set within that?
That question for me, Katie. Sorry, I missed that.
Yes,
yeah.
All right, Vivien, sorry.
Okay, so I think it's a mixture of being kind of having that clear sense of direction, but also being flexible, actually.
Yeah.
So I mean, you know, once you've launched, really, you should then, you know, each team and each department will be developing their own plans, you know, that align with that strategy. So, and then you've got your KPIs and you know, you should all be moving in the same direction. But I mean, I do think we need to build in reviews because things do change. You know, we didn't know 2 years ago we'd have a cost of living crisis, and that would affect the environment in which we operate, and we don't know what's coming down the line in a couple of years. Yeah. So, you know, there can be big shifts that can throw you off course a bit. And you know, that's, as Tina says, that's all right. You can't deliver everything, and it may be that you have to pause on something. And maybe you say, you know what, we need to move a little bit quicker in this area, given what we now know. And also being realistic as charities, if some funding becomes available that is, you know, right for you strategically, we weren't going to do that piece of work in 2 years' time, but with the funding is now available now. Is there an opportunity here just to kind of shift a few things around? I think those kinds of conversations should be ongoing, really. It should never be something that you say, no, we've got our strategy and we're not shifting, we're just doing this, you know, kind of tunnel vision. I think that would be wrong. So it is that balance all the time, and as Tina said, it's a live document, it's a live conversation.
Yeah, no, fantastic. We're coming, you know, heading very quickly now to past. So in the last couple of minutes, I would absolutely love it if each of you could perhaps even just put forward one, whether it's a kind of top tip or what you think is the most kind of important component of good strategic planning for our audience today. Aaron, I'm going to come to you first, as we've not heard from you for a few moments. What's your one thing? It can be two at a stretch, but
I'll take one so I don't take another answer away from the other panelists. For me, it's to be about having a really compelling vision and mission. I think having that sit at the top of everything. You know, there are over 160,000 charities in the UK, so you know you're going to struggle to have a truly unique vision and mission. But ultimately, it's almost like for an external audience, whether that's a donor, partner, just the general public who's coming across your organization for the first time, it's almost a window into your organization. That vision and mission is almost the first thing that they might see about your organization, and it's really important that it's, you know, compelling. If you're looking about fundraising, it's the first chance to win someone over to your cause. Personally, I feel like I see some visions and missions in the charity sector that are too operational. You know, become the #1 charity in XYZ almost. And something like that is a great motivational tool from an internal team perspective, etc. But it's not compelling for an external audience. And then, as Vivien's alluded to several times today, having that clear vision and mission just means that you have focus as a team, as a board, etc. And you can review objectives, KPIs, and the strategy as long as you're staying true to that vision statement and mission statement.
Thank you very much. Tina, over to you. Your one kind of top tip or...
I have vision, mission and value. Thank you. I suppose touching on what Vivien said about this being a live document. So to try and make your strategy achievable and deliverable, make sure you have got buy-in and engagement with your board and the communities you serve, because none of us want to be done by and not done to. So even from the charity's point of view, back to fundraising, what Aaron's just said, I do think always consulting with the families that you're serving or the communities, it's very helpful as an evidence base to make sure that what you're doing is what they want. So deliverable, a good vision, values and mission. And I do agree, I do think that can attract financial support, and to try and make it, I would say, don't make something overly ambitious. Deliverable and focused, so you've got some direction of where you want to go with a few changes along the way.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Tina. Really helpful. Vivien, your top thing.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, by the way, but I would just add one that really plays to your organisational strengths.
Yeah,
that builds on those, and I don't mean that's not about being complacent, or you shouldn't make any assumptions about what they are. You need to test those out and you need to check them out. But if what you identify is something that makes you really different, distinctive, fills a real need and gap, if you have a strategy that builds on all of that, I think is what will be part of the success in achieving it.
Thank you very much. And just from kind of my perspective, a few kind of key takeaways that I've jotted down as we've been talking just before we wrap up. So one of the things was that accepting change will happen. So, change is going to happen, regardless of how great your strategy is, things change, and be prepared for that. And I think, as I said earlier, I think that the last few years has prepared many organisations for the fact that that is the case. Vivien's point around focusing on what you do know, not what you don't know when you're approaching strategic planning, I think is a really, really kind of short but very sensible takeaway, I think, from today. And then, in terms of your stakeholder input, I think being really efficient and focused. So Aaron talked a bit about, the kind of breadth of stakeholders. Tina, you talked about your board, and making sure that you use them for the right things in the right way rather than going with a blank page. So being really efficient and focused with your stakeholder engagement. But I would like to say a huge thank you to Aaron, Vivien, Tina for your time today. I think it's been really valuable. I've learnt loads. It really kind of made me think about, my role as a trustee for a charity as well as the work we do at Oaks. And I hope everybody who's joined us this afternoon in the audience has also found it really useful. We look forward to seeing you again on our next event, which will be later in the year. And I believe we will send around the recording of this as well as, a bit of a write-up of those key takeaways. But thank you again to all of you and have a great rest of your day.
Oh, thank you so much, Katie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tina.
Bye.
Bye.